Something else we've talked about quite a bit here with Bishop on Air is the ongoing ways that rules are implemented whenever laws are passed, or how executive agencies may actually craft laws through the rulemaking process, and what kind of check and balance is there at the State House for such actions. Administrative rulemaking gets a little bit into the weeds, but I think it's important that people understand how exactly this happens. And in particular, we've got a story about the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, who are responsible for overseeing daycares, and they had their time in front of the Illinois Joint Committee on Administrative Rules yesterday, where actually it was a bipartisan lashing against the Child Welfare Agency. So let's go ahead and get into that, where you've got the questions that were raised about a rule that was suspended over the summer. And the rule essentially says that child care workers, child care assistants at a certain level of education and certification, they can't watch toddlers under the age of 2 for more than 90 minutes at the beginning of the day and 90 minutes at the end of the day. During COVID, they opened that up to say 3 hours at the beginning of the day and 3 hours at the end of the day. After the emergency was lifted, they brought back that 90-minute rule, and that put a crimp on available staff for these daycare centers. So that was the issue of several meetings in a row of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. And clearly, legislators from both sides of the aisle not happy about the Department of Children and Family Services when it comes to the regulation of daycare centers. State Representative Dave Vella, a Democrat, he started off yesterday with the concerns he's had and the concerns he's hearing from his constituents. Let me fire this back up for you and get it turned up so you guys can actually hear what Dave has to say here. State Representative Dave Vella.
This rule that has changed a couple times in the last couple weeks, and has changed considerably in the last 6 months. And in the meantime, daycare providers have been contacting my office, contacting all of our offices, not knowing what to do with their small businesses. And I have workers in my district who cannot find a daycare facility to save their lives. And we're jacking around with rules to allow people to work in the daycares. We need daycares. We need daycare providers. We are forcing them out of the system because of the rules that we're putting into place.
So, Dave, he went on to discuss how the various constituencies are being impacted by that, and he says that there needs to be relaxation to ensure that these daycare operators can actually do their job and provide daycare services.
And we are now coming up against a time on October 29th when this rule is, the emergency rule is going to go away, and we are, I would say, forced to accept what is on the table, and we will accept what's on the table to make sure that at least, for the time being, these things are, allowed so that people can actually work. But I'm just asking you to look into your department, into yourselves, and try to figure out if there's a better way to do this than having to come back here and fight with us, and just to accept that we have a need, and that I understand you want best practice, but sometimes we just need people to watch our kids while we're going to work. And it's very frustrating to me when a mother comes to me and she says, I can't find some place to watch my child, so I'm going to place my child with their 11-year-old brother because there's not enough daycares, because they just can't open them, because it's too expensive and too complicated. So please, going forward, do what you can to make this process easier, safer, and just more user-friendly for the people who are out there trying to watch our kids.
So again, State Representative Dave Valla there, Democrat, raising his concerns. Wasn't just Democrats, it was also Republicans. Here is State Representative Stephen Reich, who's been very outspoken about all of this.
You've run out the clock, and I think you feel rather smug about that. I'll be honest with you. I think that you think you've pulled one over on us. You've got a rule in place now that you think will solve this problem, which it will not.
So he goes on to just share more frustrations overall about the rule, the process, the stakeholders being upset, the lack of attention paid to those who are asking substantial questions about how they're supposed to comply with this rule. Again, here's State Representative Stephen Reich.
This is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable. This agency deserves nothing but condemnation for the way that this rulemaking has been handled. The failure of this agency to run out the clock, to make this agency think that it has the authority to do this simply because they've given us no alternative is unacceptable. I know that you folks are looking for a new director, and I hope to God that this director is somebody who comes in and understands the problems that exist in this agency, one of which is daycare licensing, which it has no business doing.
And again, Reich mentioning there that they have a director search underway. But he also talked about how it's not just DCFS that's given JCAR problems.
Other agencies are playing rope-a-dope with us as well. But you guys take the cake. You take the cake. You give us assurances, and then we find out you're not telling us the truth.
So on that, we'll hear some of what State Senator Sue Rezin has to say. But you've got Reich, who reflects on a pretty important news story of a couple of DCFS workers, former workers, who were charged with crimes because of the death of 5-year-old A.J. Friend. And here's Representative Reich reflecting on that recent news story.
Had 2 DCFS workers on trial, one of whom was found guilty on 2 charges of child endangerment. This isn't the fault of just those 2 workers, although they deserve the guilty verdict was well deserved. The judge made it plain in his closing argument, in his final reckoning, that the real responsibility here falls on this agency. Your failures have led to the death of children. Your priorities are misplaced. Everything that you've done that leads to the death of children and abuse and neglect has your fingerprints all over it. I am not going to put up with this anymore. I can't understand why it is you think that just because you have the statutory authority to do certain things, you don't have the moral authority to protect the children in your charge. I'm disgusted by every single solitary one of you. That's all I have to say, because if I say more, it'll be too much.
So again, that's State Representative Stephen Reich to the officials from the Department of Children and Family Services that oversee daycare rules and the licensing of daycares. But State Senator Sue Rezin, she brought up something that we actually got a FOIA request in on when they were talking about this over the summer. And this is after the Department of Children and Family Services Deputy Director of Licensing, Shantae Blankenship, told JCAR in July that the department's received more than 300 complaints about the issue of daycare assistants not of a certain certification overseeing rooms of young children. And they say that they got 300 complaints about that issue since 2019. More than 290 were substantiated, she said. This is a quote from her back at that hearing. These numbers clearly show that leaving an assistant alone with a qualified teacher is a safety concern that cannot be ignored. So without a qualified teacher there, they say it's a safety concern that can't be ignored. But a public records request I put in, I got back just a small little sheet. And let me see if I can pull this up so you can see it. Just in what this sheet looks like with a breakdown of the data. It shows that you've got 121 complaints filed over one rule, 148 complaints filed over another rule, 305 total. But then when you look at the substantiated numbers, 19 out of 121, 33 out of 145, that only adds up to about what, 52 substantiated complaints. So State Senator Sue Rezin said that what was presented before is not the correct assumption, and she shared her frustrations with how that was presented several months ago in front of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I received somebody who's in my district, because we've all been contacted by the licensed daycares in our district. This information was FOIA'd. And I just want to correct the record, because when you're talking about data used to come to these decisions, the statement needs to be correct. So according to the FOIA and the information received, instead of 300 complaints, there were 214 complaints that were lodged. However, of the 214 complaints, there were not 292 substantiated complaints that were substantiated. There were 23 complaints that were substantiated out of the 214 complaints. So that's a clearly different picture than your testimony from a month ago, which was there were 300 complaints, and of the 300 complaints against the daycare providers, the aides, there were 292 complaints that were substantiated. These are two completely different pictures that were, and information that was provided to this committee to justify why you are trying to enforce this rule.
So again, that's State Senator Sue Rezin highlighting the disparity between what the committee was told at a committee versus what the actual FOIA documentation shows. And again, daycare licensing complaints, 300 plus complaints filed, but only from my calculation, 52 were substantiated. So fascinating to hear that. Moving on to others, again, it was a bipartisan lashing of the Department of Children and Family Services. State Representative Curtis Tarver, he shared his concerns with how this has played out.
Every morning, so when I take my daughter to school, I tell her two things. Sweetheart, we can get through anything as long as you tell me the truth. And your job is to tell me the truth, my job is to deal with it. Your job is to tell us the truth, our job is to deal with it. You all blatantly lied. I should play this voicemail right now to read it into the record. When you left me a voicemail saying, we've talked, we have an agreement with the stakeholders, and now you all playing fast and loose like you don't know what the hell a stakeholder is, but you do. It's very easy to know who the stakeholders are because they're the people you didn't talk to. You talked to who you wanted to talk to, you then gave us misinformation and told us that you talked to the stakeholders, and you didn't.
So Tarver talks about the lack of communication and how it's played out and actually hurt this entire process. He continues on.
You get to go back to your office, hide behind emails and things like that. We talk to people that we represent. That's what we do, day in and day out. And we make less money doing it than you do. It's disrespectful. It's disingenuous. I'm honestly tired of it, but I will tell you this. Remember this. That side of the table versus this side of the table. We don't come to you. I don't have to come to you for anything. You will need me before I need you. You'll need this committee before we need you. And this is a bipartisan disdain for your department.
So Tarver highlighting again, just it's not Republicans that are only critical, it's Democrats as well that are critical of the Department of Children and Family Services when it comes to this rulemaking. State Senator Christina Castro, a Democrat from Elgin, she also was pretty forceful with how she felt about the Department of Children and Family Services.
I mean, how are you not all embarrassed to be sitting here? I mean, I'm just asking the question. And I'm not saying the work that you're doing is not hard, but how do you guys continue to lie to this committee, lie to providers? Because you're not the one having to figure out the childcare center. You mentioned substitutes. They don't have substitutes. Everybody they try to move and hire has to be approved by you. Has to be approved by DCFS.
She goes on to talk about the overall problem and says that she as a legislator is willing to act to remove some of these powers away from DCFS.
Be forewarned. There will probably be several of us on this committee filing bills to deal with this issue once and for all. And maybe one is to pull it out of DCFS. Because honestly, you need to focus on the one thing that right now you're doing horribly on, is taking care of the kids who are in our care. Maybe that should be all your focus and your mission should be redriven. Because taking care of childcare providers or dealing with it maybe belongs in another department. I don't know which one, maybe DHS, who knows? But the way this is all operated is disgraceful, and you all should be ashamed. All should be ashamed, and I won't be forgetting it.
So again, that's State Senator Christina Castro from yesterday's Joint Committee on Administrative Rules hearing, where they touched on a variety of things, including the rules for daycare operators and whether or not daycare assistants can watch rooms of children under 2 for more than 90 minutes at the beginning and at the end of the day. I connected with Dezaray Brookshire. She's with the Illinois Directors, Owners of Childcare Centers, who represents childcare operators, and she said that she was actually pleased with how the JCAR meeting went, but disappointed because you've got this rule that's still very much impacting how they can operate. Here is Dezaray Brookshire from ILDOC.
Yeah, so we were as thrilled as can be with the JCAR meeting today. Of course, as far as the 3-hour rule is concerned, we did not get the full outcome that we were anticipating, which was for the rule to remain the same that it's been for the last 3 years. And that was the deal that they made with Representative Mason when they promised her to run this through rule instead of the legislative process. However, we've spent the last several months talking with many of the members on JCAR, and it's just wonderful to see that our voices are finally being heard. And that finally somebody is just as frustrated about this as childcare providers are. We've been frustrated for a long time. We've been dealing with the overreach from the department for a long time, and it's just nice to know that we're not the only ones that see the games that they're playing.
When it comes, and again, when I talked with Dezaray yesterday, getting her reaction to the JCAR meeting and what exactly this means and how the impacts are real for daycare operators. So again, here's Dezaray Brookshire from the Illinois Directors and Owners of Childcare Centers. Vital service.
Absolutely. So this industry has been in a staffing crisis for a long time, since before the pandemic even. And the 3-hour rule came to be in 2020, in the beginning of the pandemic, to kind of relieve some of that staffing stress. And if anything good could have come out of COVID, that was something that was really helpful and that we wanted to see continue. We have, surveyed the fields, surveyed our, nearly 1,000 members, and hundreds of programs have reported that they could potentially have to close classrooms, if not completely close their doors, if they lost the ability to lose this rule. And this is just a Band-Aid on the gaping wound that is the staffing crisis, but we would not be surviving today without it. More changes need to take place to solve this issue, but this was a good first step, and it needs to continue and survive.
So we've got this rule that is still being debated, and talking with Dezaray yesterday, she says that the rule is still in effect, but there was an objection filed at least. Here's Dezaray.
No, so I spoke with a representative after the JCAR meeting, and they, at the beginning of the meeting, did approve the rule, the permanent rulemaking. However, the objection was to the fact that this has not really solved the issue, is my understanding. So gotcha. DCFS made a proposal to, because they were hard stop to utilizing this rule in classrooms under the age of 2. And then they were willing to negotiate and say that they would allow that with somebody who has up to 1 year of experience working in the child care field. And we're open to discussing a compromise. We reached out to DCFS in hopes, as the stakeholders for this industry, to reach some type of a compromise. But the problem is we felt like the language was just too complicated to be fairly enforced across the state. And, we ran out the clock on this. DCFS ran out the clock on this. Their proposed draft did not come in until late last week, and the emergency rules expire 10/29. So JCAR was left with no option but to adopt this. Otherwise, we would have lost the rule in its entirety.
So again, sharing with you a conversation I had with Dezaray Brookshire from Illinois Directors, Owners, and Childcare Centers about the daycare rule. And part of the conversation also, I got her to react to the Illinois State Senator Christina Castro, who said, we should go ahead and remove the Department of Children and Family Services from overseeing daycare operations. Here's Desiray's response to that.
That's something that ILDOC definitely supports. It's something that we have said for years, that DCFS is an agency in crisis. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the state that can deny that anymore. They have a lot going on. They just had, an audit come out a couple weeks ago that, did not show them in the best light. The director is stepping down at the end of this year. And we just feel like some major changes are needed, and we are in full support of those changes happening via legislation, hopefully as soon as next spring.
So we'll be watching what happens, but I wanted to offer Dezaray as well a final word on this overall issue. Here's what she had to say.
Just to reiterate how thankful we are to the members of JCAR for all the work that they have done on this. I mean, it was just such a relief to, finally hear our voices heard. We're an industry that's been fighting to have our voices heard for a long time. Everybody knows how important childcare is. It is not something that just impacts providers. This impacts the entire state, the workforce across the entire state. So, it is truly a bipartisan issue. It needs bipartisan support, and we need to get these issues resolved before we lose more licensed programs than we already have.
So we'll see how that plays out as we continue to track this issue and its impacts on child care operators. Again, thanks to Dezaray Brookshire for connecting with me yesterday. So that is where we're at on that situation. Of course, I'll be on the ground watching everything that happens in the weeks ahead, but definitely keep it here with Bishop on Air. Subscribe, like, hit that notification bell, do whatever you got to do to make sure that you are connected to what's going on here. All right, so again, follow me anywhere. Just search Bishop on Air, and we can connect and make sure that things are, keeping you informed and connected, and you know what's going on with your tax dollars in the state of Illinois. So thanks for tuning in.